Hello viewers, well TT3 Isle of Man Riding on the Edge is going to be released in just over a week from now. And of course we come to this eternal debate on handling. What is the handling right? Is it right? Does it look right? Have they gone in the right direction? Lots of questions in terms of finding the handling, what suits different players, what they expect to see visually and why. I thought I would go through my history of bike games to show some of you how I've come to my various conclusions over the years, and to look forward to TT3 with the direction they've taken in the handling, how it works, why they've chosen the direction they have, and why it's the one I most prefer. Getting biking games right. Let's take a look. You know, for myself, I guess when I go back to the 1980s, I was playing Paperboy, riding up a street, throwing papers at houses, dodging various obstacles, and then at the end of the street you'd get to an off-road section. It was very simple, playable, but very frustrating, very, very difficult indeed, but didn't have many games, and so you went with the flow. I also played a number of 2D overhead biking games that had different techniques in terms of the way the bike would sway. The big step forward came in Super Hang-On. In the arcade, it was a full bike arcade machine. It was full size. You'd lean the full bike with a monitor on it, so you'd be staring at the monitor. Very difficult indeed. Far more difficult to play than the emulations that you see people completing at home. The physicality involved in it was a whole different level. For what it's worth, I'm just over 6'6". Back then I wasn't tall enough to control the bike, so I needed a bit of help to help push the bike from side to side, but it was a lot of fun to play and I enjoyed it, and we didn't complain too much about it because it was state-of-the-art tech. It was about as real as you're going to get in terms of getting close to real motorsport racing, and I've shown it on the channel a few times as well. Moving on, you know, you have the mass system conversion. That was a lot of fun, arcade style. It felt something like Pole Position. And then we have Road Rash. Again, a lot of bikers enjoyed this. They enjoyed the rough and ready style. There was more animation to the bikes, the way the bike would skew across the track at times, trying to add more detail to the bike handling. Yet somehow it felt right. It was playable. You could play the game, beat up other riders, fight your way to the end. It felt like a thrill to play. It was fun. You had some funny crashes, running around. Sometimes when you fell off your bike, you didn't run and pick up your bike. You just decided to go for a run because you could. It's these little things in games because you can. As we move forward in technology and we see Road Rash on the 3DO and the PlayStation 1 at launch, and you see all these buildings lining the road, more dynamics were actually built into it. The way the bike sways, it can lose it, there are grip changes, adds to it all of the time. But again, we weren't critical of the bike handling as such. It moved like we imagine a bike should move. The graphics moving forward and the enjoyment of just exploring these new visual worlds was enough for us to say, hey, these things have moved forward. Moving on from there, you then go to something like Hang On Saturn. I remember when Super Hang On was coming out for the Saturn, or Hang On, and I was incredibly disappointed because that was the epitome of a bike moving like that from side to side, and the angular wheel as well didn't help. It really was oversensitive. It didn't work well. It didn't feel natural. And moving from 2D sprites to 3D, it showed that the challenge was going to be a lot more than people were expecting. Suddenly, when things moved into 3D, we wanted to see a more natural bike movement, more natural movement of the human. It just wasn't feeling right at all. Something was really off here, and I was actually quite disappointed at the time, as the 3D performance of the Saturn at that point wasn't great either. So there was nothing in that game that particularly worked. But then Manx TT comes out in the arcade. Now, I don't have any footage of the arcade machine. The arcade machine is the best bike arcade machine ever made. you'd climb onto a bike and you'd steer it physically with your back end. You'd be steering your body weight, leaning into the corners, controlling everything as you went through them. It was one of the most visceral, realistic biking experiences you'll ever have for so many reasons. It just felt so natural, tearing your way around this course, huge levels of risk, and yet somehow playable. I played this game a lot at the time on the 50-inch machine, and there's almost no screenshots of it or videos anywhere online. It's a real shame, because it really did take the biking genre forward. At the same time, you had Cybercycles from Namco, and again, this is one of many bike games where you just stand on two pegs and you're standing on the floor leaning the bike, but it still looked and played a lot more realistically than you will see on emulation that you're seeing here, because of course an emulation doesn't have the analog control. You're not moving the bike, so you're not seeing naturally what it was like seeing that running in the arcade. Again, it was very physical. We're at summer 1995. We're looking at 3D graphics, the System 22 in Ridge Racer, the Super System 22 we were seeing now from Namco. Technology moving forward, everybody buzzing. Remember, most of us still had a Mega Drive and a Super Nintendo at home, so this was a long way from what we were playing. When you move on from that, you move on, for me, to the PlayStation 1 games such as the evolution of Road Rash, the Road Rash 3D, the other games that came out, again utilizing more of the 3D graphics, and again more biker dynamics was brought in. What I really wanted to do was show the biker having to lift the bike and change their body weight and change the weight distribution of the bike, and it's all in there. It makes the game more complex to play, but again, if you're willing to give it time, it was playable, it was fun, and the developers were pushing the systems beyond the limits in many respects. They were doing things the PlayStation couldn't really do. They were just having a go and saying, we've got an idea, let's go for it. It was such an exciting time for bike games at the time. So we have a selection of bike games on the PlayStation 1, and we move to PS2. Now PS2, near launch, it came out in Japan, March 2000. Ridge Racer, obviously, Ridge Racer 5 Day 1, love that. And then Namco were producing MotoGP, which came out maybe a month or two after launch. One of the best bike games on the system, one of the best bike games I've played in my life. Now, if I show you gameplay now, and I haven't played it right now, but I will go and play it before I put this video up. If I show you the gameplay, you're going to see the bike's it's like that again, but yet I could look at a corner, I could see the apex, I could control the bike. Over time, you learn about the suspension system and the tyre system they were putting in there and how it worked with the bike and throwing the corner in, little slides you could get with the bike. So much detail in there. It was way more detailed than the graphics would have you believe. I'll also point out it ran at 60 FPS. And that's why when developers often complain to me now, oh, we can't do 60 FPS on a game. Well, if you could do 60 FPS on a course with full suspension and physics in PS2 times, we can find a way now. And so this is where you get all your reference material. I loved playing this game, and I think it's one of the best bike games ever made. It really did have that nice angular sort of response to it. And that was followed by a whole raft of different bike games on the PS2. You know, you had TT Superbikes. Again, it was a lot of fun, but look at it now. Again, it's got that directional handling. So people think, oh, wow, TT Superbikes was the best. Yeah, graphically, when you look at it now, it doesn't have all the biker animation. It's all focused on the handling of the bike. Turning the bike to a corner, hitting that apex, getting on the power, feeling the rush, feeling the speed, feeling the feeling of movement, feeling the achievement for completing it at the end perfectly. Bike games give you this feeling where you're open to the elements, you're feeling that speed, there's a rush to the apex more than you get from a driving game in the same way. It's from a car game in the same way. It's got this real flow to it, and you want to get that feeling, and that's where Tourist Trophy and CT Superbikes, they all had that. I mean, Tourist Trophy, again, a fantastic achievement from the Polyphony developers. They're utilizing that Gran Turismo technology, put it into a game. It looked good, it played good, but yet by today's standards, again, players would be very critical of it because they'd say, oh, the rider animation isn't good enough. However, they did implement it well. There's a lot of techniques there, preempting the corner, preparing the rider's body weight, very well handled, and it's one of the best bike games ever made. So again, Namco, with their wizardry of the PS2 and Polyphony, those two companies for me took bike games forward a long way, and we really found something that worked. Then we moved to the 360 and the PS3, and something changed in the world of bike games. It wasn't getting the same level of investment, so the investment that went into Tourist Trophy was vastly more than probably any other bike game that's out there. And I'm skipping hundreds of bike games, I'm just focusing on some of the core ones here. Burnout Paradise, and Burnout Paradise had very playable bikes. It was noted in the comments there just how playable the bikes were. Project Gotham Racing 4 that included bikes, which again, welcome to see cars racing bikes. It's really trying to find that handling model, getting it just right, but whenever you look at something that works well, it's got that motion to it. Then we change, there's a change with MotoGP comes in from Milestone, then MotoGP is taken over by Capcom, and there are different approaches to the types of handling. Handling starts to become more complex. The what it looks like seems to be more important than what it plays like. Okay, fine. So we're getting more complicated now. With driving games, same thing happened. We went from fun arcade racing and perception of driving to actually needing to get a bit more experience. At that point then, I go to driving academies and GT academies, and I test all different cars out, and I get a feeling for those cars, and I try and convey that. Same with the bikes. So you visit an academy and you do some cruising on a bike around a track, and then a guy says, hey, I'm going to take you out. So the California Superbike School took me out many years ago now, and it gave me an idea of what it was like when superbikers are racing around Silverstone racetrack. What I realized at the time was not only the physicality on your body, but your neck, and my head was about to fall off my shoulders after 5 laps. It was intense. It was something you'll never forget. You know, the rush of being on a bike at speed is quite like anything else. I then asked one of the bikers years ago to talk about, really get an understanding of biking culture, and I spoke to a chap, Nathan Dyke, and he was starting in his way getting into bike racing and starting from the bottom. I'd talk to him regularly about what are the challenges you're facing and what is the mindset, and he would talk about, you know, finding bumps, and the guys are quicker than me on these bumps and I don't know how, and then the bikers worked with each other to tune the bike and help each other, and then they create crews, and it was a real atmosphere amongst it. And so you go from the bike racing to the bike cruising, the kind of Ace Cafe. I visited Ace Cafe, I talked to the bikers there. I spoke to super bikers. I caught up with Steve Parrish to ask him what it was like with bike culture through the years. I really want to get a good idea, and I have friends who bike all the time. I wanted to ask about what it was to be a racer, what it was, the mindset, but then also from a cruising perspective on bikes. What are you guys looking for? What kind of roads? What's the feeling that comes through you when you play video games or bike games? What feelings are you getting or not getting? In the main, the funny thing is that there was this voice on the internet about 10 years ago that said games need to be more and more realistic. And so, of course, as we look to MotoGP, it was getting more and more realistic years ago. Milestone was still quite heavily criticised because their technology was not where some people wanted it, but they were moving in the right direction. Their heart was in the right place, and I felt things were developing quite well at that time. They just needed to watch the understeer that was creeping in. And then you come to Ride and the animation and the way it looked on Ride. This was a real step forward in many ways. I enjoyed Ride 1, though I could see that creeping understeer that was coming in because they wanted to work on the whole dynamics and feedback of the bike. So I skipped back to the bikers and I try to understand what they liked, and talking to the bikers, not every biker's sitting playing video games 24/7. He wants to pick up a game, he wants to feel good, he wants to get something out of it. I felt that there was a disconnect that was going on there between these expert players that wanted what they perceived to be the handling of a bike then you've got gamers, and then you've got bikers. There are some bikers that really do spend a lot of time on the games, such as Davey Todd, who rides the Isle of Man TT and knows it inside out, and he's blooming brilliant at the game. But then you have other bikers who just want to pick up and play it, and they want the bike to go where they want it to go. So we're moving more to relevant times. I've tried to look at my own history of bikes. I've tried to look at the feedback from all these other bikers and what they want and what they feel they need in the game, plus what I've experienced. And I look at more recent times. The Milestone games have improved their technology since they moved to the Unreal Engine in terms of their graphics and sound. It's all moving forward in the right direction for them. And yet, the gameplay has not moved forward in the way I would like. Wasn't entirely. The gameplay just didn't do it for me on Ride 4. I just felt that I was riding around courses I know very well and not hitting the apexes, and if I was braking too early, I was hitting the wall. That's what really annoyed me. It wasn't braking too late and going off. It was braking too early, and then the bike leans, and then you're like, oh, I've braked too early, and you crash. Because you're going too slow, you crash. And that was something that annoyed the hell out of me, because I'm thinking, when you're learning to drive a car, you drive it slowly, and then you get faster and faster and faster. And the danger comes from braking later, and then your tyre temperatures and everything else. With the bike games for Milestone, you couldn't do that. The way the handling was working is you're braking early, turning in, and you try to adjust, and then you're just going to crash anyway. So in the meantime, we had Drive Club bikes released. And I thought that was a really nice, again, quick animation of the rider moving along, the bike moving well. I thought this is good. This is good fun. I've enjoyed Drive Club bikes more than I'm enjoying a lot of the bike games right now. It's rugged. The bike's bouncing around. He can take a hit from a wall. Fine. I don't care. I don't need a wall to take me out every 2 seconds. I just want to enjoy feeling like a badass. And that's what Drive Club bikes, Burnout Paradise, is what these games give you, is that badass feeling where you can just be rugged and take it and just keep on going. You need a bit of that as a gamer to get in there. You have it in all kinds of games, Motorstorm, other games, they have this sort of rugged feeling. So we come up to present day, and we have Isle of Man TT. What should I say? Should we move to Raceward Studio, and of course the release of Rims a couple of years ago. Again, finding a sweet spot. And I mentioned in the videos at the time, it was about finding a sweet spot between that quickness of movement, the animation of the rider, and getting that feeling just right. And of course, recently I've tested MotoGP 23, and when you cruise just very slowly in a straight line, you'll just see the rider position himself for the next corner before we've even got there. So the game is preempting the way you're going to turn by moving the rider, so that when you do just move on the stick, it's all going to work. So we reach this fundamental problem. What are you trying to achieve with a bike game? Okay, so you're controlling the bike, you're controlling the handlebars, you have the biker's arms, the biker's body, the biker's head, neck, legs, suspension, wheels. All of that is being controlled with one stick. It has to control all of those elements. It is not possible for a game to control all of those elements and make it exactly the way all of you want it. So what's really important is to forget what everybody wants, forget all the noise from everybody, and just say, what makes it fun for me to be able to ride this bike, hit the brakes in a way that feels good, turn to the apex and control the power through the apex? What dynamics do I want to feel through the bike? What dynamics can we get rid of, and what dynamics can we keep to give me a feeling that I'm in control of the bike? That feeling of lifting the bike, of leaning it, of pulling it back, of leaning it, of braking, that feeling of braking, the pressure it puts on the rider, all of that stuff. What can I do to get to that point? This is a very complex series of physics, and all of these games are working very hard to find a solution. Whether they find a solution I like or not is up to them. I personally feel that the Rims and the TT have found a better solution. So let's talk about TT for a moment. We went from the directional handling in 2018, which I really liked. I like this leaning angle. I like this idea that it went exactly where I want it to. What I didn't like in 2018 was the loss of, I mentioned the loss of front end grip under braking, or sometimes you turn into a slow corner, it just keeps on going into the wall and you're like, oh, well, you know, just weird things that happened in the physics, and it let it down. It made it very difficult doing clean laps. Then in TT2, I couldn't really tell you all the benefits because they had this sort of dynamic moving camera in there to give you speed and make you feel like you were going at 500 mile an hour. So that was also something that was out. So now on TT3, the idea is to bring together all of these elements so that everything works well in a way that you like. Okay, so we're getting there. The next step then is, once we've figured out the handling, once we've figured out this little stick and how it controls the 20 different things that it's got to control, you're thinking about feeling of speed. And this is another little complaint that's sort of tiresome when you're trying to deal with it. If you're looking at a very narrow point, so if you're zoomed in at the front of the bike and you're focused on that one point on the bike, the feeling of speed won't feel as quick because you're looking at small bits in the distance. This is exactly how a racing driver's mind works. You know, people say, oh God, look how fast I'm going, look how fast I'm going. It's all no. What are you doing? Accelerate. That point I'm going to brake. Hit the brake. That point I'm gently accelerating. Straighten, brake, turn in, think of gears, whatever you're doing. You know, you're doing everything that you need to do. You're thinking of that moment. You're slowing everything down and you're focused on that one point. You're not focused on the trees flying by or signs or whatever going on around you. You're focused on that apex, that braking point, the flow of the gear changes, the braking point, the bump, the line that you're following, whatever it is. These are just points. You're following points as far ahead up the road. You're looking out of the corner. You're not in the corner. You're looking as far up as you can. So you're slowing your view down. So when people want a game that looks artificially fast, I know a lot of people do, but I don't find that these are the people that play the game all the time that want this. They're sort of the gamers that pick it up and they'll drop the game in 5 minutes and they'll say, oh, I really like the speed in TT2. It made me feel fast. The problem is it's also down to the viewpoint you play from. The further away you play from the bike, if you think about it, if you're going at 500 miles an hour on the ground, imagine what that feels like, everything flying by. Now go at 500 miles an hour in an aeroplane and everything looks very slow. And you think, I'm going at 500 miles an hour, but I don't feel like it. That's because you're further and further from the object. So when you're using a viewpoint on a bike, consequently, the further you are, if you're behind the bike, it changes the feeling of speed. If you really want a great feeling of speed, get yourself a widescreen monitor, get yourself a triple screen, wrap them around you, and you'll be amazed that any game that has some feeling of speed in it, it increases it exponentially. So there's all those elements. Right, so we've got through the handling, we've got through the feeling of speed, and so we end up where TT is now. And we end up why some people say to me, Alan, why were you not as critical of TT1? Because I enjoyed that style of handling, as I've established in MotoGP 2 through the ages. I like directional handling. I like to lean the bike, look to an apex, hit that apex, and feel that I'm in control of that bike, that I'm in control of it, and that if I'm oversteering, I can add a bit more power. Perhaps I can slide the bike a little bit through the corner and feel like a badass. Perhaps I can do something on a bike that would normally take 20 years of practice for a real biker to learn, and I can learn it in 20 seconds and it would feel natural, because that's what it is to play and enjoy a video game, even if it has simulation elements to it. So remember, it's always an interpretation. Now the next thing is going to be controller. What kind of controller do you need? People talk about a bike steering wheel. I can't play about a bike control. This is not how you drive a bike. It's not how you drive a bike. That's great for an arcade game in the 80s, even the little leaning things. It's great for an arcade game years ago. Unless you've got a Manx TT arcade machine, there was a thing where you could use your real bike, which we covered a couple of years ago. It was pretty cool. I don't know what it cost. If you've got a garage and it's big enough and you want to use your real bike to control your game, I'm sure it's great fun for the 10 people that can afford it. So bike controller's not going to happen. This is going to be your bike controller. And so the idea is, how do we make it fun? And that's where we end up now with the recent bike games that are being released. And this is why I'm liking what we're doing with TT now. They're finding the balance of the rider animation to make it natural to turn into the corners. When you're doing street racing of this type, of the Isle of Man style, you need that fluid control where you can look to an apex, turn to that apex, and feel that you're in control of the throttle, the brakes, the general feeling of the bike. It's all there. Finding a solution to this is not going to be easy, but my feeling is that the TT games have found the best solution. This is the way I like to go. This is on a course, if you like the TT games from years ago, the MotoGP games, it follows in that direction. Intuitive, fast handling with the animation struggling to keep up. That's the way it is. And every time you see a tweak of bike games over the next few years, you'll see ideas and techniques on how the rider leans and making sure that the AI system preempts your input into the controller so that you see the rider doing something relating to what you're doing and reacting quickly upon what you're doing rather than just leaning from side to side. It's never an easy one to get it absolutely right, but in terms of the progress of where we're going in bike games, it is progress. But I think if we look in history, and I look at MotoGP, I look at Tourist Trophy, they had it right a long time ago. I think there is this feeling of simulation, there is this feeling that esport players know best because of their perception of what it is to ride a bike, and maybe in many respects some of the simulation elements are better. I mean, there are simulations online, and there's the Superbike one, and they are interesting in their perception of what should happen when you control that stick as to simulating a bike. That will never simulate what it is to be on a bike. Never. It's just never going to happen. You're never going to simulate what all those elements are like. So you need that perception of control and to feel right. Right, that's me having a word about bike games. What do I know about bike games? I don't know. I've tested probably a few hundred over the years, and they're either fun to me and they feel intuitive, or they're not when it comes down to it. I think Isle of Man TT, I'm going to be testing the final game pretty soon, but I can say what I've played of it already, it takes a bit of getting used to, but once you get used to it, you can ride the Isle of Man TT and you can judge your speed, and your speed judgment is there. The speed feels good, the control feels good. I liked what I've been playing so far. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying that once you turn off connected brakes and you're doing front and rear braking, you aren't going to find some imbalance in there, or there might be some tricky bumps around the course, or whatever the millions of players find when they're on the game. But I can say I think they found a sweet spot. I think in terms of what Milestone are doing, they're going their own route. I'm not saying I enjoy it. I don't particularly enjoy it. I find it quite difficult to play. I think they need to look at where they're going in the direction, and we'll see where Ride 5 goes later this year, if it's going to be something new or if it's just going to be an extension of what we've seen before with new tracks and graphics and stuff like that. But either way, let me know your thoughts in the comments. I always welcome all of your thoughts and your comments and what you feel that you would like to see in a bike game. Do you agree or disagree with what I've said today? Are there bike games in history that you have really liked? Tell me what those bike games are. Tell me why you really like them and why you found them great fun and what you'd like to see in a bike game. But that's it from me for now. As ever, more soon.